Today, I am very confident you will meet talented, committed, experienced people who represent exemplary programs, broadly speaking, in civics in the academy. You will observe diverse strategies and philosophies. And what I wanted to do for a minute here is orient you to some of the variations that I perceive in advance. I assume you'll notice other forms of disagreement and difference apart from the ones I name. And I would ask you to look out for those. First, any program that's designed for civic education probably reflects some kind of a diagnosis, a core problem in the broader world that the organizers seek to address. When I got into this business around 2000 or even the late 90s, which is also when the Tisch College of Civic Life was founded, probably the most prevalent diagnosis in the field was the theory that was then elaborately spelled out by Robert Putnam in his 2000 best-selling book, Bowling Alone. So the idea was our political system, constitutional democracy and market economy was very stable, would be around for students' whole lives, so we were preparing students to participate in that. The official policy debate was pretty narrow, not that much ideological room between, let's say, the two President Bushes and President Clinton. But participation in civic life, it's gradually eroded with declining rates of volunteering and voting. So many colleges and universities, nonprofits, coalitions, a whole new federal agency promoted community engagement, which often meant service learning, community partnerships. And a lot of us worked on encouraging young people to vote. As you will see from today, I think, those efforts do continue, and in some ways they've deepened and strengthened. I actually happen to think the thesis of Bowling Alone about declining participation is still applicable and even worse. But now there are other diagnoses that are influential. So for some today, the problem that jumps out is polarization and an inability to talk productively across ideological difference or other kinds of difference. And that problem might be connected to social media and to now to artificial intelligence. For some, the problem might be ideological homogeneity, and the most common diagnosis of that is that the left is too dominant in academia. For others, the problem is authoritarianism or authoritarian populism. It's a global phenomenon with a lot of that, maybe not all of it, coming from the right. For some, there's a failure to understand and appreciate the heritage of the US Republic on its 250th, while for others it's an inability to address grievous current social or environmental problems at a global scale. Some would emphasize the dramatic loss of trust in a whole range of institutions, of course, including the university. And any of you can endorse, well, maybe other ideas than the ones I mentioned, or more than one of those diagnoses. I think I would check a bunch of them if I were asked. But the differences, I think, in those diagnoses explain some of the variation in the programs that you observe today. These programs also differ in other ways than that. So as you listen to the speakers, you might also ask, what's the scope or scale of their work? Are they talking about the campus, a community, a geographical community, the Republic of the United States, the world? You might think about the time frame. Is civic education mostly about history up to the present? Is it mostly about the present and the future? You might imagine what kind of fundamental concrete scene comes to mind when you envision civic education at the college level. Should we be thinking of students with their heads bent over copies of the same texts in a seminar room, discussing how the author presents matters of high moral import? By the way, that author could be anyone, Plato, Kimberly Crenshaw, lots of other kind of authors. But is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about students crunching numbers to inform a memo for a local nonprofit? Are we thinking about students tutoring local teenagers or building an app or studying for tests, concrete knowledge tests about US politics? So those are all different visions. The goal of today's discussion is not to reach consensus. Agreement would be impossible in this time with this many people, but also I'm not sure at all that it would be desirable. Presumably our sector should provide diverse opportunities in a pluralistic world. I do suspect that, nevertheless, that many of the people who do different kinds of work still wrestle with similar issues and trade-offs. In other words, they have some of the same concerns in mind. As part of another effort, which is an ambitious effort to improve K-12 civic education called the Educating for American Democracy Project, which you're all invited to join, the team identified what we called design challenges. So design challenges are not problems that can be fixed. We didn't have solutions. They're permanent tensions that we called on the field to constantly bear in mind. So kind of my last point at this moment is you might ask yourself, what design challenges do you hear these people wrestling with? And what design challenges do you think they should wrestle with? And I'll just give you 3 examples, not because they're the right ones, but to provoke your thinking for better ideas. So one design challenge, I think, is the classroom versus experience in the world. How can students learn from being responsibly involved in communities despite not having extensive academic knowledge? How can they study civic topics in the classroom without having extensive civic experience? How can a book make sense if you don't know how the world works? In other words, how can students do good in the world if they don't already know a lot? And how can they grasp and assess texts and ideas about civic life if they've not already experienced a lot of civic engagement? So that's a design challenge. Another one is realism versus inspiration. How can we analyze and understand actual institutions which often limit and even suppress human freedom and agency while also inspiring students to participate in the world around them? Final one, heritage versus innovation. How can we introduce students to ideas, institutions, and practices inherited from the past while also helping them to learn to innovate beneficially in civic life? Or to put it really simply, how can we develop both trustees of the institutions and designers of institutions? So anyway, those are just some sketchy thoughts to maybe inspire you to listen generously, as it says in the booth back there, but also critically today.